Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The First Duty, which is episode 19 of season 5 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest user poll is for The Next Generation. This is the episode The First Duty. So, The First Duty is the episode in which Wesley Crusher gets into an accident causing the death of a cadet while practicing for a stunt with, a flying stunt with shuttlecrafts or whatever, that they were going to perform at an academy ceremony. So Picard goes back and the Enterprise are back for the ceremony. So they're there for the investigation. They slowly start to discover that Wesley and his teammates are lying, that they tried to perform a very dangerous and prohibited stunt, and that's what caused the accident that caused the death of their fellow cadet. So Picard lays it out to Wesley that if he has to come forward, if not, Picard will expose him. And his team leader, Nick Locarno, insists that he'd be betraying his friends if he came forward, but eventually he does come forward. And Nick Locarno takes all the blame as the team leader, and he is expelled from the academy, but Wesley and his teammates can remain, but they have to repeat the year, so they have to stay an extra year. So, I don't know. The more I watch this episode, the more I like it. It's a strange thing, because when this episode first came out many years ago, I always thought it was, and for the longest time really, I always thought it was okay. Like, it was an okay episode. Like, it came out after Cause and Effect, which is this big, time loop sci-fi extravaganza that blew my mind. And then the next week, some Wesley episode where they're back at the academy, sitting in rooms talking. So it kind of underwhelmed me. But with a lot of episodes, like, the older I get, the more I appreciate it. But this one, it seemed to take me a really long time. It wasn't until, like, in the past couple of years that I really, really started to appreciate this episode. When I did my rewatch when I rewatched the entire show of Star Trek Next Generation, when I covered every episode one season at a time, I liked this episode a lot better, and I talked about it in that review, how I appreciate this episode even more. Now, watching it now for this review, I like it even better. So it seems like every time I watch it, I like it better. And I think, now the reason why I bring up that it comes out after Cause and Effect is because I think in the past, the reason why I never really, took notice of this episode or thought it was just okay is because it is a really different kind of Next Generation episode. Even in season 5 is known as the drama season. But even in the drama season, they still had sci-fi elements like the Inner Light, classic dramatic episode, but it still relied on the sci-fi weird planet that has a probe where Picard experiences another life, or Darmok, which has these weird aliens that speak with a weird language, or Silicon Avatar, which involves like this weird crystalline entity. So it's still a lot of sci-fi elements, whereas this episode, they just go back to Starfleet Academy and have a trial. And so that doesn't really have that sci-fi element to it, even though season 5 was known for its more dramatic episodes. This seemed really out of place, and I think that might have something to do with why I never stood up and noticed this episode, because especially after just watching a really sci-fi heavy episode like Cause and Effect, I'm like, oh, it's so awesome, time looping, and then the next episode, oh, they're back on Earth, sitting in courtrooms, talking. Oh, wow. And so I actually think that it helped me to watch this episode out of context just now for this review, that I didn't have those jumblings in my mind. I could just focus on the episode itself and appreciate it for what it is. Now, of course, I wouldn't expect anyone to watch it out of context without never seeing an episode of Next Generation, because it also helps to know what Starfleet is and what Starfleet Academy is and who Wesley is and his relationship to Picard. But it does work, not like doing this during a binge or whatever, or even week to week, just watching it randomly, but and having that background knowledge of who these characters are. I think this episode is actually really unique in that regard, where it is a more straightforward, dramatic episode. Now, I'm going to make a bold statement. Maybe some people won't consider it so bold, but I will definitively say right here and now that this is the best Wesley Crusher episode. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Wesley, particularly how he appears in Season 1. And Season 2, well, Season 2 he wasn't as bad. Season 1 was definitely the worst. Season 3, he was kind of, he didn't appear all that much, and he was barely in Season 4, so it's not even worth mentioning. But yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of, because he was basically a Mary Sue character. He was basically always saved the ship, he always saved the day, and it was always very contrived that he did, and all the adults never listened to him. And that's what I really hated about his character, and plus the fact that they kind of forced a 14-year-old onto the bridge to fly the ship, basically, to be the navigator. I remember Galaxy Quest, great movie, was definitely mocking that when they had like a 10-year-old flying the Galaxy Quest. Pedal to the metal, Captain! You know that we're making fun of Wesley Crusher. And so the concept of having a 14-year-old driving the ship, yeah, that's pretty dumb. I gotta be honest. And the fact they tried to overcompensate for, let's prove that he deserves to be there by making him a very contrived boy genius and saving the day constantly, which to me only made the situation worse. In this episode, he felt like a real human character with flaws and the strengths. He felt like a dynamic three-dimensional character. So that's why I will definitively say this is the best Wesley Crusher episode. It's funny because he had 2 cameos in Season 5. This is the second out of 2, and the first one was The Game, which I believe is one of the worst episodes of the show, in which he was a total Mary Sue and saved the whole ship, even though it was totally a stupid situation that he was the only one. Him and his girlfriend were the only ones that didn't get affected by the game. That's bullshit. And he saved the day. So it's funny that they brought him back for cameos in Season 5. In the first one, they just did the same old Mary Sue saved the day bullshit that made this character terrible in the first place. But then the second time they bring him back, they actually make the best damn episode with him and make him a believable, dynamic, interesting, fully, three-dimensional character. Which is what they really should have done in the first place. Anyway, it seems like, because, alright, so looking at the two of the shows that aired in the 90s that featured a teenager on, Next Generation had Wesley and Deep Space Nine had Jake. And Next Generation, the problem is they made him an officer who was flying the ship too soon. And in Deep Space Nine, the problem was they didn't make Jake join Starfleet at all, which is fine, except for the fact they treat him as they say he's a main cast member, and they don't really have anything to do with him. So every time they try to construct it, not every time because there's the Visitor, but most times, the Muse, they try to construct a story around him. It just ends up being terrible. And so it seems like they should have actually done an in-between where they had a teenager who starts off as not a Starfleet officer, who's just there and occasionally shows up and eventually becomes one. I mean, I guess you could say that happened with Nog, but then, I'm not going to get into Nog. I have all my issues with him. I didn't think that worked with him. But anyway, so it seems like that they should have done that. But anyway, but we're at the stage we're at now in Season 5 where he's a grown, 18-year-old, 19-year-old, however old is he supposed to be, at Starfleet Academy. He felt like a real character finally. It felt like this situation. And I love that he was flawed. I love that he's actually lying and he's faced with this really difficult moral dilemma that he doesn't know how to deal with. I mean, that's great fucking storytelling. I think this is really what they should have been doing with him all along. Now, so let me get more into the episode. Let me give some credit where credit is due. Because if you're familiar with my channel at all, you may have heard me talk about Gates McFadden and how I think she's a terrible actor, particularly and when it comes to episodes where she's the main focus, with Dr. Crusher-centric episodes. I think, like, Sub Rosa comes to mind, Suspicions comes to mind, Remember Me comes to mind. Like, she just does terrible acting. And Descent Part 2, when she was, like, the captain of the ship, like, I don't know. I don't think she works as an actor. So let me give some credit where credit is due. I think her acting in this episode was terrific. I actually took notice of that. Like, this is the one thing that really got me. I was like, damn. For an actor I didn't think was very good, she's doing some great acting in this episode. Particularly, the one scene that really impressed me was at the start when Picard went to tell her about the accident that Wesley was in. And he had to say, look, he's been in an accident, but he's okay. He's recovering at a hospital. And how, I think, Gates McFadden does a great job of showing Crusher how she's trying to intellectually, she knows that that her son's okay and everything's fine, but she still has that emotionally motherly instinct of, holy shit, my son's in danger, fuck, I need to do something to help him. And she's trying to suppress that emotion with what her intellectual knowledge, but it's still like it's an internal struggle, and she does such a great subtle job of portraying this the way, she talks like, oh yeah, it's fine, yeah, I know he's fine, it's fine. Maybe I should call the academy, make sure they have all this stuff in record. Maybe I should do it. And Picard's like, Beverly, they can handle it. They're fine. He's like, yeah, I know. He's fine. I know it's fine. Hey, can we go there faster? Like, that was great. I actually love that scene. I really do commend her performance there. I actually thought it really, really worked. And I don't think that's the only example in the show where Gates McFadden does a good performance. I think from time to time she can, but other times, particularly when she's the main focus, it kind of drops the ball. And I stand by that, by the way, especially for episodes like Sub Rosa. Leave it alone! And I won't even get into that. Anyway, I suppose it helps that the writing's good, too. And that always helps. Good actors can even make bad writing look good, but they have to be a great actor for that. But yeah, it does help when the writing's good. So anyway, God, where do I even start next? Like let's start with Boothby next, because Boothby was name dropped in the final mission and again in the game, and so we finally got to see him, and so they hired a fairly well-known good actor, Ray Winston, who does a pretty good job. Unfortunately, the only time they ever bring him back in Star Trek is twice in season 5 of Voyager for 2 terrible episodes, 2 of the worst episodes. I wasn't going to say season 5 of Voyager, but actually the entire show of Voyager. Poor guy. I mean, he's a great actor. Boothby was an interesting character, and they other than this episode, they just bring him back for 2 terrible episodes. Anyway, I do like his inclusion in this episode, especially since they name dropped him earlier, and Picard's like, oh, seek Boothby, he's this great gardener guy, and a kind of cantankerous little old man gardening being, oh, you messed up my flowers, but then in having all this great insight, that really worked for the character. And I love the dynamic of, and it was maybe a little bit contrived, but I'm able to forgive it because I think it works so well, that when Picard talks to Boothby, he talks about how he had some incident when he was at the academy that Boothby helped him with. He's like, I never really thanked you for it. You know, you did so much for me. And Boothby's like, no, I don't want to hear it. You know, you knew what you needed to do. I was just, I was just there to remind you about what you already knew, or made sure that you listened to yourself. Which is what Picard says to Wesley at the end of the episode. And I love that dynamic. I love that symmetry. Even though it is kind of contrived, but I think it really works. It also shows, I think it adds a lot to the episode, actually. Because it shows that, and this is something they'll cover more in episodes like Tapestry, but it shows like that Picard was not a perfect person either, that he was flawed when he was younger. In fact, Boothby says something to the effect that there's not a person alive who's never done something stupid when they were young. Which is very true. And so it shows that Picard himself wasn't perfect, and that he had messed up, and that he had someone there to like give him tough love, and that he was basically doing the same thing to Wesley. That's why I think it makes that scene where Picard confronts Wesley ever so more powerful, knowing that, you know, Picard is doing what he feels is best for Wesley. He's coming down as a hard-ass asshole because he thinks that's what needs to be done, because it was done for him. Because Picard even said to Boothby, like, I didn't talk to you for like months afterwards, making it clear that Boothby, you know, did something was being a hard-ass asshole to Picard. And so Picard knew that's what Wesley needed, and like and was relentless. God damn, I love that scene in the Ready Room so damn much. When Picard, I listed in one of my favorite Picard speeches. It's definitely up there. When Picard just wails into Wesley. I love how as soon as like Wesley comes into the Ready Room, Picard's like, "Oh, do you know what this is? This is a Colbert starburst," and immediately like proving that he knows exactly what happened, and he knows exactly what Wesley did, and that he's lying. And of course, Wesley tries to be all vague about it, and Picard's like, am I correct? And he doesn't answer. It's like, I asked you a question. He's like, I choose not to answer. And Picard's right up to him and says, you choose not to answer. Like, I love this scene. Talking about good acting, of course, Patrick Stewart giving good acting is not something out of the normal. It's, Patrick Stewart's amazing for most. That's why I named him the best actor in Star Trek, and I am sticking to that, regardless of what he does in Picard, but that's another story. But anyway, yeah, he's fucking amazing in this scene. The way he just gets in his face and, gives a speech about the first duty is to the truth. And it is really a tough moral dilemma for Wesley. And I think, again, this episode does a great job by contrasting that scene with the next scene with Nick Locarno, when Nick Locarno is like, do what's best for your friends. Who the fuck are you? Who the hell are you to decide for all of us, for the whole team, our fates? Which this should be a team decision. And he kind of has a point there too. Although ultimately I think he's in the wrong, and Picard's right because he's Picard. And it's funny too that Nick Locarno says, "Oh, he got to you, didn't you, Picard? He gave you some story about duty and honor." Well, it must have been a great speech. And it was even like talking to the screen, being like, "Of course it's a great speech. It's from Picard. God damn it! Yeah, you're damn right, it's a great speech." But anyway, God, I just think the drama in this episode is just so damn good, especially, and then you add into the part with the cadet who died, Cadet Alberts, and his father, because Nick, I think this is part of what pushed Wesley over the edge, is that Nick had come up with this bullshit story about how Albert was kind of just not hacking it, and the accident was his fault. And of course that's didn't sit right with Wesley, nor should it. And especially the fact when Albert's father came up to him and apologized for his son causing the accident. Of course, oh my God. Again, this was great acting from Will Wheaton's part too. I gotta praise him as well. Especially like just just his performance with no dialogue whatsoever, just the look on his face when Albert's father is apologizing for something that he knows for a fact is a lie, that they're just besmirching his son's name, and that guilt is written all over his face. It was such good acting, such amazing acting. And of course, that was what made the ending scene when Wesley came forward so much more powerful, is when he even said flat out to Albert's father, being like, "No, sir, your son didn't fail us, we failed him." It was just, it was such a great character building moment. And I think this is why I think this makes Wesley such a great character in this episode, which is why this is hands down the best Wesley episode, because it shows his strength of character, but also that he's flawed. And really, he was placed in an impossible situation. That, because he is betraying his friends, either that or betray not just his duty, not just the truth, but betraying what he knows is right. Especially letting that guy, Albert's father, believe that his son was a failure and almost endangered everyone else, when he knows that's a lie. That is disrespectful to the memory of a cadet who died in an accident that he helped cause. So it was by far the right thing to do. Now it's funny that Nick Locarno will even say to Wesley that you betrayed me and you betrayed the team, and Wesley even feels like he betrayed his friends. And this gets into apparently behind the scenes argument, or not argument, but a discussion, shall we say, between the two people who wrote this episode, Ronald D. Moore and Naren Shankar. Two amazing writers, by the way. And so Ronald D. Moore wanted to end the episode with a different situation where all the cadets were going to be expelled, and one of them could step forward and tell the truth to save their own ass. And so Wesley chooses not to tell the truth because he chooses his friends rather than saving his own ass. And so it shows that he's a loyal person. And by the way, he would get expelled from the academy. But I think Ronald D. Moore gets his way in the next Wesley appearance in season 7 when he quits. But let's not speak of that bullshit. Anyway, but Naren Shankar's idea, of course, was more along the lines of what we got here, where it was more about speaking up and telling the truth was the right thing to do, that they were all going to get off scot-free unless he spoke up and told the truth, and so he needed to stay true to who he was. But Ronald D. Moore was still against that because he felt like Wesley shouldn't betray his friends. And I disagree with him. And I disagree with what Nick Locarno said about how he betrayed, and how Wesley felt he betrayed Nick Locarno. Because here's my argument. Wesley didn't betray Nick Locarno. Nick Locarno betrayed him. Because he's the one who pressured all of them, especially Albert, who clearly was not ready and wasn't really into it. He pressured them all into performing an illegal, dangerous stunt, a stunt that has been outlawed for 100 years, because the last time it was attempted during practice, just like this was practice, every cadet died. So he's this hothead, arrogant ass who thinks, oh, we're so much better, we can do this dangerous, illegal thing, that he pressured his entire team to do so. And once Alberts died, he lied and blamed Alberts for something that was clearly his fault, and he pressured everyone on his team to also lie. Now, he says this bullshit, oh, I did it for the team, which he kind of, to be fair to him, he backs up by sacrificing his career to save the team, which you can give him brownie points for that, but that doesn't, to me, that doesn't change the fact that it's all his fault. So Yeah, so Wesley did not betray Nick Locarno. Nick Locarno betrayed him. Nick Locarno put him in this impossible situation, and Wesley main mistake was to go along with this in the first place, was to try to let himself be talked into doing this dangerous stunt, and then letting himself be talked into lying. And it took Picard and his amazing speech to snap him out of it, to do the right thing, to do what Wesley should have done in the first fucking place. Unfortunately, Cito and the other one were not as strong-willed as Wesley, or they didn't have a Picard in their corner to shake him out of it, and so they were just droning along, going along, peer pressure basically, into this very charismatic, and I would even throw out the word manipulative guy. So, no. I totally disagree with Ronald D. Moore. Wesley, this doesn't hurt his character by betraying his friends. It's like, oh, Wesley would never betray his friends, because he didn't. His friends betrayed him. And he finally did the right thing, especially in honoring his dead friend and not letting his father believe that he was incompetent when in fact it's their fault he died. I mean, that's a huge thing. I mean, maybe Ron D. Moore's script was different, that wouldn't be the case. I don't know. But still, if he's complaining about the script as is, I think ultimately he says he was okay with it. He was just kind of against the idea of Wesley betraying his friends. But still, as it's written, he didn't. So it's fine. Anyway, speaking of Cito, she, of course, reappears in the episode, not the show, but the episode Lower Decks in Season 7. I already did a review for the episode, and it's amazing what they did with this character. So it's great seeing her here, because she's kind of just a background character with, a couple lines. But it's great that it shows that Picard took an interest in the other cadets, and that he went out of his way to make sure that she had a chance. And then, of course, she ended up sacrificing herself for a mission, which is very sad. Spoilers for that episode. But, of course, you should have seen all the episodes now if you're watching this, but whatever. Anyway, and I already talked about that. And they thought about bringing her back in an episode of Deep Space Nine, which I am still, every time I see her on the screen, I'm really pissed off that they didn't do that. I really think they should have. People think it would have taken away from the ending of Lower Decks, but I disagree. I think it would have actually been very strong and a much better episode than Hard Time, which is what the original concept for Hard Time was. So that's why I can never like that episode, because I think the Cito one would have been way better. But, tangent. Speaking of the other cadets, hey, it's Tom Paris. Now, it's actually Nick Locarno, of course, played by Robert Duncan McNeil, who would go on to play a very, very similar character in Voyager, Tom Paris. Now, there's a lot of speculation behind the scenes. Some people saying that the reason why they changed it from Locarno to Tom Paris is for rights issues, because they would have to pay the writers royalties, but then other people say actually that's not the case. They wouldn't have to pay the writers royalties. So it's very unclear on why they did it. Jerry Taylor, her official line was she thought that Nick Locarno was irredeemable. Personally, I don't think so. I think a redemption arc for him would have been just as likely, perhaps even a tad bit more than Tom Paris's, but whatever. And plus, you have a bunch of terrorists on board as your main crew, who I'm sure killed a bunch of people. But Nick Locarno's the one who's irredeemable? Not sure if I buy that. But Tom Paris is a different character, though, than Nick Locarno. So it would have brought a different dynamic had they said flat out this is Nick Locarno. It would have been a different character than what we got, and it would have added a different dynamic to the show. Voyager, so maybe they wanted that different dynamic. I totally buy that. The way Robert Duncan McNeil describes it, although of course he wasn't involved in the writing process at all, but the way he describes it is that Nick Locarno seemed like a good guy, but was really not so good. And Tom Paris seemed like he was not so good, but he was really a good guy. So he says that's the difference between them. I'm sure that's how he justified it internally as an actor, but and so he definitely did play him differently too. I will give you that. But it was still, there were still moments in this episode like I keep seeing Tom Paris talking to Wesley. But anyway, regardless, I don't begrudge Voyager for changing it to Tom Paris. And in fact, at first they were like, oh, let's get an actor that's like Robert Duncan McNeil, and eventually like, why don't we just get Robert Duncan McNeil? I mean, the problem with that is because you see that and you like, why didn't it just keep the same character? But I think they had decided earlier not to do the same character because, as I said, it would change the dynamic, so I don't begrudge them that at all. Now, another point I wanted to bring up with this episode is that watching this reminds me of another episode featuring Starfleet cadets making mistakes and being arrogant. And that episode is The Valiant. Now, I don't like that episode. So The Valiant is the episode of Deep Space Nine where Jake and Nog go aboard a ship full of cadets, like the elite cadets, the Red Squad, who are running the ship, and they get all arrogant, and they do a lot of stupid shit, and eventually they attack a Dominion ship because they think they can defeat it, and they end up getting their asses kicked. I have many issues with that episode, none the least being I think is a bit contrived, but my biggest issue is that I don't think the cadets would, especially really trained elite cadets, would be that stupid. Now, I got into a discussion once with Wes over from Penske File, who totally disagrees and says when I brought up I thought that the cadets wouldn't be that stupid, he was like, well, weren't you ever a teenager? Yes, teenagers can do stupid things, but not that stupid. I don't buy, especially trained teenagers who are supposed to be the top of their class, like the best of the best, the elite. No way would they be that fucking stupid. And I stand by my stance in that they were way too fucking stupid. And plus, I don't really like any story, movie, episode or whatever, that the moral is, oh, teenagers are too cocky and stupid, and they get themselves killed because they're too cocky and stupid, which, absolutely can be the case, but I think it kind of demonizes teenagers in general, especially the way the Valiant was portrayed. I don't think any of them had any sort of high points, and they were definitely really dim and way too arrogant and cocky. I mean, is it plausible? Perhaps. Am I interested in watching that? Absolutely not. It's just, I just don't like it. I don't buy it, and I just think it's dumb. And the reason why I'm bringing it up now in this episode, because this is the better version of that story, because this is also a story of teenagers being arrogant and cocky, but in a way that's completely believable and relatable, by the way. Like, now, contrary to what Wes says, I don't relate at all to those characters in the Valiant. I don't think I was ever that dumb as a teenager. Not that I was the brightest teenager ever. Trust me, done a lot of stupid shit, but I couldn't relate to that at all. That was just unrelatable to me. Whereas this episode is relatable because it is about teenagers doing stupid shit, but in a way that's more believable, in a way that's more relatable. And, especially talking about from a personal perspective, allowing yourself to be talked into doing stupid shit by someone who's charismatic. Very guilty of that as a teenager. I'm not going to get into details, but yes, I let myself be talked into doing some stupid shit because, the person was charismatic and I wanted to be their friend, and it was in the name of friendship. So I find this extremely relatable. And also, it's not I don't feel like it's demonizing teenagers the way that the Valiant did. It's showing teenagers making stupid, dumb mistakes. And in fact, Boothby has that line I mentioned earlier about there's not a person alive who hasn't done anything stupid when they were younger, which is absolutely true. But this is more believable and relatable than trying to attack an unstoppable Dominion ship and getting your whole crew killed. That's just that's too much. That's too far. And it should be noted that Ronald D. Moore wrote that episode as well. And I feel like Ronald D. Moore, he's really, I love him, but then I hate him sometimes. Like, to me, I think he's best when he's paired with other writers. In this case, Naren Shankar. Whereas I think he probably kind of took control of Deep Space Nine, which sometimes worked, but sometimes did not. Valiant's a huge example of that. And so I think it's better when he's tempered a bit with someone else who's a great writer. Naren Shankar, of course, runner of The Expanse. Can't say enough good things about him. So that's why I think this episode works a lot better. Because trying to show off, thinking you're invincible, and you do the stupid Daredevil stunt is much more viable than thinking you're invincible and taking on a huge Dominion warship that's unbeatable by yourself instead of getting help. I believe that a fuck ton more. It's way more believable and relatable. And the fact that once they made the mistake, they're trying to cover it up to protect themselves, and they feel like, oh, it's about helping the team. It's all about this team and whatever. Like that, I buy a hell of a lot more than the whole Red Squad bullshit, where they're just saying Red Squad, and like, during Jake and the Brig for making a girl cry because she's talking about home or whatever. Like, that's stupid. I'm sorry, I hate that episode. But this, like, where he's like, he had the members of the team, like, peer pressuring, come on, we can do it, we can lie. That is so much better. So, I will make the firm stance now that this is the way better version of Valiant. I don't like that episode. Anyway, so my rating for the first duty out of 10, I'm going to give this a 9. And this is a 9, excellent. And this is the highest rating I've given it before. Before, previous years, I would give it a 7. Recently, I upped it to an 8. I'm going to up it to a 9. I think this is I can't believe, like, I never noticed how brilliant this episode was before. I think this is a very powerful, dramatic, relatable episode. Definitely the best Wesley episode. And it has a lot of amazing acting in it. I forgot to praise Robert Duncan McNeil. Also gives an amazing performance. It's no wonder why they hired him to become a main cast member on another Star Trek show. And, of course, Will Wheaton probably gives his best performance. Gates McFadden gives an amazing performance in just that one scene. Of course, Patrick Stewart always gives an amazing performance, but this is one of the most memorable speeches he ever gave with the first duty. Like, that was such a good scene. Such a good scene. Anyway, that is it for my review of First Duty. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my other videos on many other Star Trek material. And at the moment, I'm reviewing Lower Decks and covering other shows like The Expanse and Star Wars Clone Wars and Better Call Saul. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.